Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's LRA Research to Practice show. Really excited about tonight's topic. We're talking about young adults and their writing practices. We have a great panel of experts here who are going to help guide our thinking on this topic of young adults and their writing, give us some things to think about from their research, from their experience, and help us kind of translate that into the classroom. So if we could start, first, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and sharing your work with us. And if we could start with introductions, just to let us know who you are and where you're from. And Anna, if you'd like to begin.
Sure. Hi, I'm Anna Smith, and I'm currently at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I'm working on a postdoc in writing and new learning ecologies.
Welcome, thank you.
Thanks.
Jen?
Sure. My name is Jen Scott Kerwood. I'm a senior lecturer in English education and media studies at the University of Sydney in Australia.
Thank you, welcome. Jeremy?
Hi, my name is Jeremy Heiler. I am a 7th and 8th grade language arts teacher in Michigan. I am a writing consultant for the Chippewa River Writing Project, and I am also the co-author of Create, Compose, Connect, Reading, Writing, and Learning with Digital Tools.
Thank you. Melanie, if you want to. Melanie or Ryan, if you want to.
Should I go? I'll jump in.
Yeah, great, thanks.
I'm Ryan Risch. I taught high school English for 8 years, and now I'm at Kennesaw State University working with pre-service English teachers in Georgia.
And we have Melanie Leslie with us also today. Looks like she had a technical difficulty, but I'm sure she'll be back to join us. I just want to make sure that we're ready to get started. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Paula DiDomenico, and I am a literacy coach at the high school level at the Leiden District 212 High Schools outside of Chicago, and I'm also a doctoral student at Northern Illinois. So to get us started today, I really just kind of want to begin by, if we could describe the current context surrounding young adults and their writing practices. And Jen, I thought I'd send this off to you to get us started.
Sure. So here in Sydney, Australia, I teach pre-service English teachers, and I do research in both local schools and also do research online, how adolescents are engaging with different writing practices in online affinity spaces. What I see happening here in Australia, because we are moving to a national curriculum and also national assessments with NAPLAN, there's a focus on summative assessment of students writing in schools, and it's to the point where in a lot of the schools within the state, there's only 1 to 2 assessments per term per content area, and so it's very high stakes with students writing. So their writing may not be formatively evaluated. They might not have the space to engage in the drafting and the revising and the peer review and everything. So I think that in terms of formal schooling, the current context that I'm seeing in Australia is geared towards, again, like the high stakes, the summative assessment of student work, which can be really high pressure for students. In out of school spaces, I see a lot of young adults engaging in writing practices and multimodal writing practices related to their different interests. You know, whether it's running or it's knitting or it's a fandom of some kind. If you look at spaces like fanfiction.net or figment.com, you have these great online areas where young adults can write around their shared interests, share their work with an authentic audience in ways that I think offers a lot more agency and room for identity than might be allowed in schools.
Thank you, and anyone on the panel, just feel free to join in and share what you see as our current state of young adults writing context.
Yeah, I wonder if Jen, I'm curious to hear how Australia is maybe only a couple steps behind where we already are in the U.S. with I don't know. We really see like with the pre-service teachers that I work with in the Atlanta area, a narrowing of the literacy practices that quote unquote count, right? I think with the advent of Common Core, we're seeing genre separated into these artificial silos and things mapped to in high stakes assessment, that kind of thing. And so it's interesting working with pre-service teachers entering into that climate where we're trying to share with them all the great projects that we've always done for years and years, multi-genre projects and writing projects that have authentic audiences and using the community as curriculum, et cetera, and then having them to kind of walk into these into these classrooms that are kind of circumscribed by a lot of these forces that are at work. And so the only thing the only way that I've kind of tried to help them work through it is to develop a both-and logic of both the engaging in the rich stuff that teens are engaged in Jen's research and the things that we have to do. I think we have like this responsibility to help them clear these hurdles, yet we still have also responsibility to support the rich, literacy activity that we know that they can engage in spaces like the ones that Jen researches.
Mm-hmm.
I think with students today, I think that we're dealing with, like Jen said, the multimodal writing. It's not just about paper and pencil anymore. It's about creating videos, public service announcements, blog posts, which leads me to now students are writing for more authentic audiences compared to what they might have been doing a number of years ago when it was just the teacher or maybe a set of teachers. So there's more authentic audiences for students to write for. And then I think that students are dealing with writing spaces, just like Jen said, inside and outside of the classroom, where students have to, and teachers are having difficulties with students being able to code switch and being able to understand the difference between a formal piece of writing and a non-formal piece of writing, when it's okay to use the text lingo, when it's okay not to use text lingo or their own digital talk, as Kristen Turner from Fordham University puts it in her article. I think those are some of the things that we have to deal with middle school and high school level, and I think even at the collegiate level, I'm sure professors and teachers are still dealing with those kinds of things in terms of context and where our students are at.
So if you'd like to at this time take a moment, if you each wanted to share a bit about what you're currently working on in your research and explain to us how your research is shaping your thinking about young adults and their writing practices.
I was thinking about how this relates to our conversation about the context for writing, because we are seeing far more content creation happening in multiple spaces. I think, Jeremy, I think that's the good news, is that yes, we are seeing, as we have always have, youth using language that's appropriate for one context, in a different context, and it coming up against conventions of a different context. But youth are also writing in more contexts than they have previously. So they are having more experience going across context and writing across context. My research in particular looks at how we can understand young people's development as writers across context and across time. And particularly my dissertation research worked with a group of young men, followed them out of school, in school, over a couple of years. And one thing that I think also is a note of hope, and this goes back to what you were discussing, Ryan and Jen, about the kind of staid genres and kind of stuck, fixed genres that we're being asked to look at in some of our curricula now, is that the young men were rarely, I mean, if ever, just doing one thing when they were writing. So if they were writing in school or if they were writing out of school, they weren't just completing an assignment or weren't just crafting a poem, or they weren't just doing one thing. They weren't doing a Tumblr feed or a tweet, right? They were working to do other things. They were working to be active in their communities. They were working to establish who they were in their identities. They were doing more than one thing. So even if it was something like make an acrostic poem with these 5 vocabulary words, right? Something that we've seen and can be quite dry and the kind of fill in the blank feeling, or do a 5-paragraph essay, which one young man worked on for 3 months. He was asked to turn in drafts, one essay, over and over and over again, and it took 3 months to get the whole class through it. through that was actually working on other things, was working on establishing himself as an expert, as a poet. The one doing the essay, the one doing the acrostic poem was trying to work out his response to having an abusive father, and so was using that platform with the 5 vocabulary terms in an acrostic poem to make sense of his life in that way. So we can see our young people are using writing to affect change in their lives and in other people's lives. And there's not just, even if we are stuck with doing stuck genres, that they are addicted people, and they will continue to be.
I think, adding on to what Anna was saying, what I see happening a lot is young writers use different spaces for different purposes with their writing, whether we're talking about in-school or out-of-school contexts and everything. So for the past 3 years, I've been engaging in an online ethnography related to the Hunger Games fandom and looking at how young adults come together within this affinity space around this shared interest with the Hunger Games and the books and the films and everything. And similar to what Anna was saying about how the writers are kind of not just doing one thing at one time, they're working across different projects and across different contexts and everything too. What I see young writers doing is they use like Tumblr for engaging in role play. They use Twitter as a way to like get and to share information. Facebook's a way to maintain relationships. Forums are a place to discuss literature and film. And they're doing all of these at the same time, or within the same time span, because they're allowing them to express themselves in different ways, to receive information in different ways, and to engage with people in these different portals to the affinity space. And in terms of writing, some of the writing spaces really support this collaborative, multimodal writing. So for instance, one of the young women in my study from Perth loved using Tumblr as a way to role play with the Hunger Games. And so for her, Tumblr, it was instantaneous. So she had to know her character, she had to know her character's motivations and background and everything in order to be able to role play synchronously with someone else. Then she also used other social media in different ways too. And so I guess as a former high school teacher and as a literacy researcher, I find it really fascinating that, well, first that the writing goes across these different contexts, but then how self-driven and how much agency is really allowed for with students writing. Because I think that sometimes schools, we have the narrowing of the curriculum that Ryan was talking about too, but then sometimes we create such limited opportunities for students to show their knowledge. Because in Australia, we're very concerned with students making sure that they meet the outcomes. And a lot of times we get caught up in, okay, this is the one book we have to read to meet this outcome. This is the one type of written composition, that students can do to show this outcome. But there's really quite a variety there too. And so I think that that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind, but there's like researchers and teacher educators, there's a lot of different ways to demonstrate competency through writing. It doesn't have to be just through one particular genre or one through particular mode. And to allow students like that agency and choice, and that audience, right? The audience beyond the audience of one, their teacher. So I think that what I'm seeing happening in schools and what I'm seeing happening with my own research is what's really important to allow students that space. So it doesn't take that long to teach a student how to write like a 5-paragraph essay, to teach them about like point and evidence and analysis and link. It doesn't take that long. But what really matters is if the child actually cares about what they're writing and they have some interest in the topic. I mean, that's what's much more essential in some ways.
No, I can't agree more, and I'm sure everyone in the panel does too. I think trying to, with the way that I've been trying to work through with teachers around this is along those lines. With engaging them with a responsive, authentic audience, right? Where the impact of what they do, be it like the top of multimodal stuff that you guys are talking about, or be it writing, the impact kind of determines the effectiveness versus any kind of arbitrary rubric or that kind of thing. And so it's a move away from. I make this argument with my teachers that perhaps we fetishize the writing process a little too much. We're a little too much focused on that, and we should move our focus more towards what happens when your text enters the world and the impact. Kind of teasing out authorial intent and versus kind of what happens. Are there happy accidents? Are there backfires? Does your audience take up what you composed in the ways you had intended or not? And I think that's where it's at. I think that's why adolescents are gravitating to the spaces that Anna and Jen are describing. And I really look at the situations that Jeremy is describing as opportunities. And so when students are bringing to bear literacy practices from other spaces into the classroom, and then there's this kind of this disconnect or this kind of incommensurability of practices, wow, that's a rich opportunity really to kind of tease out what those differences are between those literacy practices, validating both as valid in one space or another, and then helping them understand that relationship and navigate that. And so I didn't mean to start out as Mr. Doom and Gloom, so I'm excited about some of what you're talking about, a lot of what you're talking about across the panel.
Can I jump in real quick? I want to pick up on this, your comments on process, on the writing process. I think that, what we saw happen with the writing process movement was a great change in pedagogy, in writing instruction pedagogy. And I think that the time has come for another movement, right? We've been talking a lot about practices, but I'm wondering if that's mostly, we've been talking about writing practices within the research community. And I'm thinking it would make a really great conversation to have within the teaching community as well. And so in our classroom practice, if we're focusing not just on a prescribed process, but looking at how do you go about writing, then we can start looking at the number of ways that people have different writing processes, and then what are those, and which ones are being effective in which contexts, and which ones are not getting me the products that are getting the best response from different audiences and different spaces, and seeing which of these approaches to writing are staying with people as they move across contexts, because in some cases it will come out in clashing, it'll come up in contrast to what's expected and desired in a different context. And in that case, then they might have problems, or it might create this great space, like you were just talking about, Ryan, with great possibility, great conversational space. So I think the practice is a great place to move to.
At the number of ways that people have different writing processes, and then what are those, and which ones are being effective in which context.
We're getting feedback.
The best response from different audiences and different spaces, and seeing which of these approaches to writing are staying with people as they move across.
What's the hardest thing to do is listen to yourself.
Clashing, they'll come up in a contrast with what's expected and desired in a different context. In that case, then.
Okay, so we got to hear a little bit about that, which is a great point to bring up about students and their processes. And I was very intrigued in your comment about which of these practices are being taken across contexts and which are staying with us. And so as you are thinking about your work with students, are you noticing any patterns that are helpful for teachers to kind of take on as they're trying to help their young writers in the classroom?
I think that's an interesting question about what's kind of going across contexts and both how are maybe young adults' writing practices in out-of-school spaces translating to what they do in school, but then also going the other way. And in my study, I was working with a young woman who is very active within the Hunger Games fandom, and she was asked to contribute a story to the PotterGames.com, which takes the characters from Harry Potter and puts them in the Hunger Games. And she was tasked with writing the story of Colin Creevey, or like the little boy with the camera. And so I was asking her about like her approach to it and everything. And so she was talking about how her English teacher taught her about like victory paths, and she would have to think about like the character's motivation and the drive. So she reread all the 7 Harry Potter books to really understand Colin like as a character, to look at both like J.K. Rowling's like writer's craft, then also to think about how she could create a victory path for him within the Hunger Games. So it was like a choose your own adventure story, and how might he be able to win and Harry Potter and Hermione wouldn't, right? Like how could he make certain choices, or how could she construct Harry and Hermione to allow Colin to potentially kill them? But so she actually really returned to what she had learned from English class, and to think about both like writer's craft and also like her process as a writer. And for her, using like J.K. Rowling, Suzanne Collins' book as like mentor text was what's really important. So she wanted to see both how they constructed the setting as well as how they constructed the characters. And so for me, that was just fascinating. And as a former English teacher, really rewarding to see that, these young women have been paying attention. And she was taking the lessons she learned from English about characterization, about setting, about the writing process, and translating them to what she was doing out of school. And being able to write the story that's online, that's gotten a lot of attention in this really public domain. So I think that was really interesting for me, again, to see how this writing translates across contexts, and it's kind of reciprocal and feeds into each other.
And I don't know if this is going to answer your question, Paula, as far as across, I think of across content areas when you're talking about across context. And one of the things that's been effective for us at the middle school level in my school is having the common vocabulary in each of the classrooms. And obviously that comes directed from me, especially in my school where I am the language arts department in the middle school, teaching in a small school. But that common vocabulary across every classroom indeed helps a great deal when it comes to students writing. And then the other point that I was going to mention too is Jen was talking about taking these practices outside of school, and that's where we try to, at least in my school, we try to set up different situations for our students to take those things away. Currently we do a salmon in the classroom project where students are taking. They raise salmon all year long, and then they're doing a argument paper about whether or not the salmon in the classroom project that's designed by our Department of Natural Resources is it effective for environment? Is it effective for our economy? And they have to write an argument paper about it, and we want that paper to be addressed to more of an authentic audience, and so it's written. There's some things that are written outside of school, obviously, and it does take place inside of school, but their audience is more of an outside. There's an outside influence there, and it's being read by Department of Water and water quality and management. And so these participants, these students that are participating in this, they're really getting this sense of real life type situations and real life writing, which I like what Jen was mentioning. So having that common vocabulary definitely helps. And the last thing I wanted to say too was that as language arts teachers, at least I feel as a language arts teacher, there are a lot of other content area teachers that are very reluctant. Writing is across the curriculum now. There's a lot of teachers that are really reluctant to take this up because it is across the content areas. And I feel that it's our job as English teachers to reach out to those other content area teachers and to help them with strategies and ways to make students writing better, because if we don't reach our hand across the aisle to help them out, then they are going to be more reluctant and they are going to push back a little bit. And I feel like, it could be one more thing that we add to our plates, but as English teachers, but I think that they'll be more receptive to some of that writing and some of that reading that would take place in their classroom where it might not if we reach across the aisle and help them a little bit with it.
Jeremy, you've given me an idea. I think that I've seen the common vocabulary among teachers very, very helpful, right, in the schools I've worked in. Just so that we can have a conversation, let alone so we can align our instruction in some way. So I was thinking, as you were talking about how powerful it would be to take texts that have been written or understood to be written, because many times they're written in school, actually, but written outside of school, right, or online, and have a common vocabulary for what to call those things that are not either your 5-paragraph essay or the things that we have become kind of solidified in schools and typical of schools. So I wonder if there's a way for teachers to do that, and on that, and in that way, like you were saying about, there's a lot of teachers for whom writing has been ruined. There's a lot of people for whom writing has been ruined, and it's become this thing that is torturous, and this thing that is defined in this one particular way. And I think it was like, I know it was Moji's studies around, was it 2007 or so, and they did these large-scale studies where they did surveys, and then they did case studies and so on around his writing and reading practices. And they found that the kids said that they didn't write at all at home, and then they would go home and then they were writing all the time. So they went and did observations, and they were writing all over the place. And so they did a cross-analysis of these different methods and figured out, there's another study that did the same thing, and they argued, well, what the students thought we meant, even if we said things outside of school, they thought because we were researchers, we meant the kinds of writing you see in school. So I'm wondering if our teachers are seeing the same thing or thinking the same thing many times, because they're not in these conversations with a lot of English teachers, or like you're saying, within like the writing project, the National Writing Project, writing project sites, where we're having these conversations about what is writing, and keeping that conversation alive would probably, or having it for the first time with a lot of teachers would probably be very beneficial.
I'm wondering if, oh, sorry, Jeremy, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ryan.
I'm wondering if there's a shift in stance, and I try to think through this with my teachers, where we move away from English teacher as writing police, right, to more of a language or writing or literacy practices broker, for lack of a better word. And I'm wondering if that brokerage involves also letting the students in on constructing that meta language around composing and that kind of stuff. And so rather than, I love the idea of a common meta language or language to talk about activity around writing and composing. I'm just wondering if there are, because I run into this with like multimodality a lot, where I want to impose a meta language on the process, but yet, there's these terms that kind of come up during the process to describe things like happy accident and backfire. That's not in any grammar book, but things that my teachers have come to use. So I'm just wondering if the students can be involved in that kind of creating of that language, and that with that brokerage stance.
Well, I think that's a great point, Ryan. I mean, when you're talking about that, I think of assessment. How do we assess these different types of multimodal writing pieces? It's not so linear anymore with handing a rubric back or giving the students a rubric. It's like you said, you have these happy accidents where students all of a sudden create this wonderful piece and they had no idea that they were going to create this. And how do you assess that? And I think that's wonderful. And that is something that and Anna had mentioned, that's something that is that's a conversation that is taking place at the National Writing Project about how we assess these multimodal pieces that are out there. And in terms, Anna, you're talking about some of the teachers and how they have this sour taste in their mouth about writing, and that's one of the things that I'm looking at right now is we need to stop blaming technology in terms of blaming it why our students come in as poor writers. It's not the technology that's creating our students to be poor writers. It's the practices that are taking place. And I'm not blaming teachers at all. I'm just saying it's the practice of the student themselves and how they're using it and not being shown how to use it effectively. That's something that I'm researching right now in terms of grammar and how do we teach our students to be digitally responsible in terms of grammar and what does that look like in digital spaces to be grammatically correct. And so both Ryan and Anna, those are great points, and we could talk all night about that stuff.
I think that, like, in terms of technology with writing too, since a lot of us work with pre-service English teachers, thinking about how technology is integrated into the curriculum, because you can use technology in like very traditional and very surface level ways, right? And if you've ever assigned students to create a PowerPoint, you've sat through 30 PowerPoint presentations, you've made that mistake, right? But I think what we can do, and what I see happening in some schools that I work with, they're teachers using technology in some really creative ways that support the collaboration, that support that multimodal thinking, that support that composing across different genres and everything too. And so I think that that's one of the things that, in terms of like moving research forward too, like really highlighting what those good practices are with teachers who are using technology to support students' writing, beyond just, teaching, to grammar and spelling and all of that too, but using writing and using technology as a tool to further students' thinking. And because what I see happening, depending on how a teacher designs like a unit, designs like the writing process, if the end goal is to create a film, having steps along the way where the students have to work collaboratively to construct their script. They have to translate that into a storyboard. So they're moving from their ideas to their words, to getting their words and their images together. That's built into the writing process. So before they can get a camera and go and shoot something, they have to know about filmmaking. They have to know about cinematography. They have to be able to have their script constructed in a way that's logical, that's linear, but then will translate into a specific medium. And so I think that that's just going back to the technology in writing. I think we see a lot of really great things happening in out-of-school spaces as well as in-school spaces, but then just making sure that we bring that forward and building that into our own teacher education programs and everything too.
Yeah, we have to start understanding, why students make the moves that they do. Why are they putting certain colors into a video, just like you're saying, Jen. Why are they choosing certain language? Why is a song, why are they choosing that song in terms of mood and those types of things? I think those are very important things to consider in terms of especially assessing a student's writing and looking at how they're assessed. So those are very good and very valid points.
Well, and it brings up two thoughts for me. One is that along with the new technologies and new ways that we have to compose, what we're so easily able to do now, right? Add a song, add some color, right? To do. Along with that has come new ways that people relate to each other. So new ways that we have access to audiences we've never had before. Our products also have their own trajectories without our instigation, right? So we might have something, we might put a meme up, and then it takes off and does its own trajectory across the web. I just saw a picture of a young man that I've worked with years ago in some TEDx, talk forum, and his comments were there like, our creations move, and we move differently than we have before. So one thing to keep in mind is that when we then try to school it, right? So we then try to go back to, okay, so how do we do an assessment on a rubric? It's that just like some conventional grammar might be inappropriate for a tweet because it won't fit in 140 characters, right? A rubric may not be appropriate for a particular kind of product that's made, because that product isn't supposed to sit still. Maybe it's supposed to be remixed and keep moving in terms of its own trajectory of how it moves across spaces and how people relate to that piece of text. So yeah, it's raising some great new questions to us about, and I think it highlights to us that even though we've had the process movement and we've been paying attention to, and we've probably been killing the writing process, the writing process in our schools now, even though we've made that move, we're still, everything's going back to the product, the written product. We still assess to that. The writing process is supposed to get us to a product, and hopefully this, so the new kinds of products that we're having, the new ways that we relate to each other through our written products, hopefully those things move us a little bit more to these conversations about practices and move us to more to what do we want? Do we want a kid who can do one particular kind of product at the end of the day, or do we want them to have particular kinds of practices that carry with them to within other contexts? And I think that it's the latter.
Yeah, I think
go ahead, Ryan.
Are you sure? Go ahead.
Yep, go ahead.
Well, just real quick, I think we just always have to keep in mind, and I know we all do, but I think we need to always name it, is when we're talking about practices, we're talking about people. And whenever we talk about what practices are sanctioned and ones that aren't, are unsanctioned, or which ones are accepted, which ones are marginalized, we're talking about people, right? And so when we marginalize certain literacy practices, we're marginalizing certain people. And I just want that as a point of emphasis here, because I think this brokerage that I'm trying to argue for is responsive to that, and sustains those differences. And yeah, that's.
And I was just going to say, I don't think the writing process is linear anymore. It's not where we start in one area and then we end at another spot. I think it's more of a circle now. And I've talked about this with other teachers. It's going back to that product again, where and how can you change it, or how can I make a and this is a really bad example, but how can I make this 5-paragraph essay, how can I make it into an online poster, and how can I turn it into a blog, and how can I, I can change it into a digital video. So, it's a circular process, and we have to teach our students to continually go back and make not necessarily just revisions to make it better per se, but those multimodal pieces that can go along with just a normal piece of writing, like a document, a Google document or a Word document. It seems to be, the writing process to me seems to be more of a circle than it used to be. And I haven't been in the game that long. I've only been in it for 15 years. So.
So Ryan's comment about marginalization brought a totally different topic to mind, and for very different reasons. So I'm interested in sharing that because I know everyone else is based in the U.S., so I wanted to share a little bit about writing in Australia and how I think it's different here in some ways. In the state of New South Wales, in years 11 and 12, students are gearing towards the higher school certificate examination. So essentially, this exams in different content areas take place over about a month-long period at the end of year 12. And their marks in their senior years, in years 11 and 12, and their scores on those exams entirely determines what university and what degree they get into. So these are really, really high stakes, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I see happening a lot is that parents who can afford it, hire tutors to work with their students because they want their children to have, the best opportunity possible. And so because these exams, the way that students represent their knowledge in these different content areas is through the written word, it's so important then, not just like what they write, but how they write. And I give workshops to year 10 students, and what I emphasize to them is that you can have the same knowledge as the person sitting next to you about history or about English, but it's how you represent that knowledge on the page that day, pen and paper, during the exam, that counts. And it counts in a way that is so high stakes. And so what I see happening is that a lot of my pre-service teachers work as private tutors for students, again, whose parents can afford this. And students then sometimes memorize an essay. So maybe they're reading a work of literature. They don't quite know what the question will be on the exam, but they have an idea. And so they'll memorize an essay. And some of them are able to then translate that essay so it actually answers the question. Others write this beautiful essay because they've worked with a tutor, they've scaffolded it, they've memorized it, that doesn't answer the question. And so it's interesting, and then you have this whole system of moderation and marking that takes place in the state, at the end of the year, where students, where teachers leave their schools, so they go into the marking centers to mark this student's work, because again, this determines what university they get into, what degree they get into, and everything. So it's interesting thinking about marginalization, but in a very, very different way that Ryan was talking about it. I see huge disparities in the state between students depending on their socioeconomic level, depending on their school, whether it's a government school or an independent school, what access they have to knowledge about the written word. And I think that it's really problematic in some ways because I see these huge disparities between, again, like these economic levels and the school cultures and everything too, but it also creates a school culture that is so highly competitive. And it works totally against collaboration and community and sharing and drafting. Some of my pre-service teachers share stories of their own high schools where students wouldn't share their work with someone else, or students, like, they would steal someone else's thumb drive. I mean, it was creating this culture that went totally against what we think about with writing and being social, being collaborative, being supportive, this writing workshop and everything too. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I worry that in both countries we might be heading in this direction with the focus on the high stakes and the summative assessment, but what that means for all writers, not just the ones who have that social and cultural capital that might directly or indirectly support their writing products.
Well, and from your stories at least, they don't sound like those are their products, actually, right? They're still not writers. They're great memorizers. Yeah.
So as we've been talking today about some of the current context facing adolescent writers and young writers, I was wondering if we could also be thinking towards the future of what types of research do you see as being necessary and relevant for this field, and what kinds of questions we should be thinking about answering in our work.
I think as a whole within literacy, I would love to see more longitudinal studies. I think of the work of like Kathy Compton-Lilly and how she has followed these students from the time that they were in kindergarten through high school and everything. And I think that longitudinal studies about literacy, but about writing in particular, I think are so powerful. And I think as researchers, that allows us to kind of go back to students at different points in time to really understand how different factors within their social, cultural, institutional context shape their writing. And I think that that is just something that I see a bit with my work in the online affinity spaces, where some young adults in my study, when they're 11 or 12, that's when they started participating on fanfiction.net, and now at 16 or 17, they're really rooted in these different fandoms and everything too. And I know Alicia Magnifico's study of Neopets. Some of her writers of the Neopian times, they're adults now, but they started into the space as teenagers, and it's part of their identity and part of their literacy practices. And so I think just longitudinal studies as a whole would be fascinating, but they would also tell us a lot about what happens with writing in school, but also what happens with writing out of school too.
Yeah, I kind of see it as longitudinal, like vertically over time, and then horizontally across spaces, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but because I'm thinking about Anna's work and kind of what I wasn't able to do in my like I tried to walk back literacy practices that I was seeing being enacted in the classroom, like where did they come from? So for some kids it was fan fiction, for some kids it was role-playing games who were writing this collaborative fantasy fiction, and so it's like tracing those practices across space, and so I kind of see that. Maybe that's a horizontal project, and the one that you're describing, Jen, is maybe this is artificial. This is a model I'm making, but that's like over time is more like vertical, that kind of thing. But it'd be really interesting to kind of tease out those intersections.
And then if you're thinking also of high school teachers who might be watching this this broadcast, if you have a piece of advice for them, I know specifically as you all were talking about how we're narrowing our curriculum but placing even more emphasis on assessment, how can we as high school teachers sort of get past that burden and really do right by our students? Do you have any advice?
Jeremy, you're probably in the best position to address this, but happy to do it from a teacher perspective.
The advice that I give the teachers is to be open to, and pardon the expression, but we're living in a technology age where students, have the hardware in their hands all the time, and I'm constantly telling teachers to, in my own school, to be open to the idea of using those pieces of technology in their classroom, and to embrace the idea of that there are different ways. Someone put it. Someone that was I listened to today speak was they said that differentiated instruction is how we instruct as teachers, but there is differentiated learning, and that's how our students learn. Every student learns differently. So what might work really well for us is we want every student to pump out a 3-page paper on an argument paper, about something. It may not work for every student. We should be open to different ideas of creating digital videos or creating a podcast, and leaving the door open for them to be creative in general with their writing, because the creativity part of writing just seems to be squashed because of so many curriculum demands and everything else. So allow the students to do the differentiated learning, and the other advice is, I always tell, I'm starting to tell teachers more and more, is to quit blaming the technology. The technology is not what's at fault here. We have to be well versed in the technology. We have to show our students how to use those pieces effectively, and then we will start getting really nice pieces of writing from our students. And it goes back to what Jen was saying with the outside of school and the inside of school. In being able to blur those lines, I guess, for lack of a better term, so that it's one space. It's not just outside inside school. And so those are some of the advice that I would offer to teachers.
I have two thoughts. One is write. That would be my advice. Write. And it's going to be hard. And you play with tools. So grab your journal that you had way back when that still has pages in the back, sure, or go buy a new one. Excuse me. But also sign up for a Twitter account, and also start a Tumblr feed, and also I don't know, buy a typewriter. and just write, and then make that what happens in your classroom. Write, and then talk about what's happening with your students. Not talk about what should be happening in writing, but what's happening in writing. And I think that's the second thing. So what's happening in our writing, and what are we doing to compose? What moves are we making? What moves are we not making? Which things have you never heard about in terms of approaching, a paragraph? Have you talked about this as a paragraph? I mean, all the things that are tried and true and traditional about writing are great information for students to have. And I think that it's becomes most receptive when it's part of conversations about how we're writing and what's happening and what are our writing practices. And that has to be in a culture of an environment in which writing is alive and well, and not extended fill in the blanks, which I think sometimes writing assignments become.
Yeah, and I'll just add two things, two subtle shifts that I try to facilitate. One is the move from either or to both and so rather than thinking I either have to teach the test or engage them in these authentic literacy practices, adopt a both and product. We can't throw out the tests. We can't throw out a lot of the obstacles that are being erected in students' way. But we can take up this both and logic when it comes to this brokerage. And then the other one is that piece, that what is writing question, and that validation that goes along with validating how students are already writing. But that has to be a yes and question, like a yes and logic rather than a yes but. Like it can't be yes but standard English. It has to be a yes and, like, yes, that is valid in that space, and now let's talk about this other space. And so that's just two subtle shifts that I try to recommend.
The advice that I give to my pre-service teachers is that, like, first they need to pay attention to the world around them. I mean, if English teachers are meant to be able to teach students how to read films and plays and books and poems, like, I think it's really important for teachers to engage with what's going on. And we're so lucky here in Sydney. We've got, like, the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, we have the film festival, we have plays, we have readings, and there's so much going on. And so I tell my students, if you need my permission to spend an afternoon in a coffee shop reading a book, or if you need my permission to go and see this really great Persian film, whatever it is, like, go and do that, because I think it's easy to become complacent and to stop reading, to stop thinking, and stop learning ourselves. But I think that as teachers, we're really models for students. And I know when I'm reading a book and I'm so excited about it, and I tell my students, they get something out of it that way too. So I think it's just really important to engage and to pay attention to what's going on, both in the news and also in terms of, like, art and culture. The other thing I tell them is to ask questions. So when they go into a school on their first practicum, ask different questions about why teachers use a particular strategy, about how students react to a particular book. And I think that it's just a good practice as a whole to ask questions, both, like, critical questions as well as rhetorical questions. And what I tell my students that, if you're concerned about a practice or you're not quite sure about it, and you ask a school about it, and the answer you get is, well, we've always done it like that, that's not sufficient, right? So we can't become complacent, with our own personal lives, but also with our own professional lives either. And it's good to pay attention, it's good to ask questions, and that's just part and parcel of what we do as teachers.
Thank you. We also have a question that has come to us from our audience via Twitter. And this audience member is wondering what our panel has to say about composition in disciplines other than English language arts. We've had some time focused on the English language arts. If you could offer your insights into other disciplines as well.
So a lot of my work at the university is working with content area teachers, so teachers who teach things in addition to English language arts, so math teachers, science teachers. I was a literacy specialist for a school district several years ago now, and I worked with woodshop teachers, right? And we talked about one of the most powerful things for all of us was when we would take time to really interrogate for ourselves what are the literacy practices of my content area. So what makes someone who does woodworking or does builds cars or studies cells, like what are the things that they do in their reading and writing practices and in their communication practices that make them a disciplinarian, that make them work. And so I think that for me the advice is still the same for teachers in those content areas. It would also be to write. As like Jen was talking about, we get out of practice of in our adulthood. We no longer have the permission to be alive in our disciplines almost. We're supposed to cut out some of the play and some of the passion of our youth, I suppose. And so it would be to get involved. Do a lab for yourself if you're a science teacher. Go try an experiment out, write it up, engage in your community as a scientist, and in that way begin to live it again and to see what it is that you take for granted as the content area specialist in the room that may not be other people don't know what you're doing. Like they don't have, you're taking it for granted and you're doing it because you're a specialist and you're the expert in the room, but other people, the students you work with are not privy to that. That, I guess, is tacit knowledge.
I'd just add across content areas, I think, the type of situations that Jeremy was describing where, students are kind of bringing to bear language use or practices from other spaces in the classroom and how there needs to be conversation around that. I think those conversations obviously need to happen across the content area. I think English teachers are wise to pay attention to what rhetorical moves matter in other content areas, and that what they may be seeing in their English classroom is a result of some confusion over, say, what an argument is across content areas. And again, I hate burdening English teachers with more than they already are burdened with, but I think it's kind of on us to start the conversation, right? Because I don't think, I don't know, but I would think that sometimes we're better positioned to start these conversations with our peers in other content areas.
I'm going to go ahead and offer some insights and a summary of kind of what we've talked about thus far, leaving a little bit of time at the end if you have any final thoughts or final questions. I feel like this conversation is just getting started, actually, and we're just kind of scratching the surface as our hour is coming to an end. Excited, though, if you're all available to continue the conversation on Twitter on Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time with the hashtag literacies. We can continue the conversation, kind of think about what we've talked about tonight and offer some further thinking on the topic with our Twitter audience. As I was listening tonight, I saw some common themes of I like the idea of both and I think it encompasses so many things. Both the literacies of the disciplines, both the literacies and the literacies in ELA, both the process and paying somewhat attention to the product, but focusing on what students really can take with them outside of the classroom. That one experience contained into that one.
As our hour is coming to
And we
an
do
end.
have Melanie here. If Melanie, you want to add your insights and your thoughts, we'd love to hear from you.
I'm getting in. Wait.
Melanie, if you'd like to join in and kind of share what you're thinking about what our panelists have had to say, and any final thoughts that you have or ideas that you'd like to share.
I'm sorry, were you just talking to me?
I was.
I am so sorry about what has happened. My modem just apparently imploded, and we've been on the phone with our carrier, and I was trying to get on my cell phone, and I am so sorry. I've heard just bits and pieces of what everybody has been saying. And the things that I've heard people talk about had to do with engaging adolescents in school, out of school spaces, the importance of multimodality in composing processes with adolescents, and of course the crush for standardized testing and how much that has narrowed views of writing. So I don't know what I have missed, and I don't know what else I can add to that. But maybe one thought that I can share in this discussion that maybe may not have been addressed has to do with the idea that new media, participatory media, digital media is ruining adolescents' academic writing. Did you all discuss that issue?
We mentioned that thought has been out there, but we'd love to hear what you have to say about the topic.
Well, that's one topic that I think has been sort of very concerning to educators, especially with the college and career readiness standards and movement toward academic writing. And one thing that I like to share with my pre-service teachers, it comes from my own research, has to do with that very issue. And in the longitudinal study that I did of 3.5 years following adolescents in their composing process, I had the privilege of watching early adolescents gain access to technology and see their writing before they had cell phones and that kind of very available connectivity with digital media and digital language, like text messaging kinds of language. And what I saw was that the students who had stronger academic, for lack of a better word, writing skills prior to becoming engaged in that kind of digital media were better at the code switching. They could go back and forth very easily.
I think we may have lost Melanie again. So I think at this point, if you'd like to offer your kind of final thoughts and final thinking, we'll be sure we send an invitation to Melanie to join us on the Literacies chat, as I'm sure she has such fascinating things to say on the topic. So if you want to just kind of think about any last minute ideas or thoughts and share those with the group, that'd be great.
Well, I need to head off to teach very shortly because it's actually Wednesday morning here in Australia, so I can go first. I would just say it's so important for like teachers and students to keep reading and keep writing and keep talking back. And I think that the power of writing is that it allows you to share your experiences and to tell your stories, but also to maybe speak back against some of these dominant cultural paradigms that we see. And I think that the written word and the spoken word can be so powerful to do that. And I think that part of our task as teachers and teacher educators is to help our students find their voice. Not just figure out what they want to say and how they want to say it, but what stories they have to tell, and to really appreciate that. And so I think that that's something that we've touched on here, thinking about how they can use technology, how they can think about the writing process, how they can, think of teachers as these writing brokers. And I think that that's what's really powerful, because again, writing allows storytelling, and that's part of our nature as humans. And so I think that's just kind of what I think one of the takeaways from this is for me today. And again, thank you for letting me take part in it. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Does anyone have a final word that they'd like to share?
Yeah, well, Jen got me thinking about, creating these counterculture messages and pushing back against imperatives. And it's just thinking about, I mean, our time in the U.S. has been just, it's been a very hard time these last few weeks. And thinking about which youth we assume can and are literate, and which youth are not. And we typically, particularly for our young men of color, we don't assume that they are. And then there's also just a general deficit mindset, again, about teenagers in general, about that they come in and they can't, and then by the time they're done, we teach them, and then they can. But to compose, to think critically, all of those things are very human. And David Kirkland has a beautiful argument about that in his new, I guess not new anymore, but his text, what is it, Silence? Mm-hmm. No, somebody help me. Do you know which one I'm thinking of? Anyway, it's a beautiful text about, around this idea that to express and compose is a very, and so this idea, I guess a final thought would be to check ourselves as teachers about what we're expecting from our students, any of them, and all of them, and to continually check ourselves and be reflexive about why it is that we're surprised to find out that some of our students write on their own time. What does that mean about what we assume that they do with their own time and don't do or are capable of?
I'll just piggyback on that, and in addition, well, not in addition to, but an extension of giving our students voice, giving them an opportunities to gauge impact of that voice, and being there, letting them get in trouble, and being there to help them navigate that. Letting them jump in the comment sections of a newspaper article and play with language and adopt a different identity and see what happens. And I know it's usually considered a cesspool of anonymity, but just opportunities like any opportunity like that where you can help them get into trouble, and I mean that in a good way in terms of gauging impact and really feeling their voice out and seeing what it can do, and yeah, so just beating the impact drum.
So someone found the title of the book. It was Search Past Silence, David Kirkland. And I think part of that is that goes with that is this idea, kind of, I like your broker idea, Ryan. I'm going to keep thinking about that and take that up. There's a Freudian quote that I tweeted out a couple weeks ago because I was thinking about it, and it's this: we often talk about helping students find their voice. And I'm thinking that the students have their voice and they know their voice and they have it, right? But it might be this amplifying. It might be helping them being, I heard just today, and I'm trying to find the quote for it right now, at this great conference about, there's a philosopher of education that was talking about that the teacher's role is to be the companion along the way, to be the sounding board for how it is that they're composing. So I think these new ways of thinking of what we are as teachers are really powerful.
Yeah, we can't be the one that's always up in front of the classroom anymore. I think we have to be beside our students a lot of times, and we have to guide them and help them. And the other point I wanted to kind of leave with tonight too is we have to continue to have those conversations with our students about the different types of writing that exists, and not only that, but we have to allow our students to reflect on their writing, and we have to allow them to discuss why they made certain moves and what they would do differently, and if they're given another chance, or if they were to do it in a different mode, how would they do it? I think we have to spend time having conversations with our students, and I know at least that at the middle school level, there are teachers that may feel they don't have time to do that, but I think we have to make time to do that. I think that's where students start to get stronger as writers, when they're given the time to not only reflect, but when they're reflecting, they're writing more. So that's another way for them to add another piece of writing as they're going through these processes. It's about conversation. For sure. So, and I too like Ryan's broker idea, and I've been thinking a lot about that.
And Melanie, if you wanted to offer final thought, we're about to log off of our show here. If you wanted to just add an insight for us to think on.
Well, first, I'm so sorry. I think I got cut off in the middle of a long story about what happened with my study, and I really apologize for that. But I think that in terms of maybe future research, we know that multimodal new media is very engaging for adolescents, but we haven't really connected the achievement piece to that. I think we need more research that looks at that connection and sort of brings the two worlds of in-school and out-of-school composing processes for adolescents together in ways that will
I think we lost Melanie one more time. I just want to take a second to thank you all so much for your time tonight and your absolutely interesting conversation. I know you've given me a lot of things to think about, as I'm sure you did for our entire audience. We will be continuing the conversation at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Thursday using the literacy hashtag, and I look forward to seeing you all there.